Okay, so you want to own a supermarket chain. You picture it: hundreds of stores, your logo on every corner, trucks rolling in at dawn, cash registers ringing all day, every single day. Because no matter what happens in the economy, people still need to eat. Recession, war, pandemic, doesn't matter. The supermarket is always open and the money never really stops. That's the dream. Here's what actually happens first. Let's talk about getting in. You've basically got two options: build from scratch or buy your way in. Building from scratch is slow and brutal. A single mid-sized supermarket, the kind with maybe 40,000 square feet, costs somewhere between $5 million and $15 million just to build and stock, depending on location. And that's before you've sold a single apple. Land in a good spot: permits, refrigeration systems, shelving, initial inventory, it adds up fast, and that's just one store. Now multiply that by however many stores you want, because one store doesn't make a chain. You need scale before you get leverage, and you need leverage before you get profit. That's the trap right there, and we'll come back to it. The faster route is buying an existing chain or buying into a franchise-style cooperative like IGA or Save-A-Lot, where you get the brand, the supply relationships, and the playbook already built. A single existing supermarket location, bought as a going concern, might run you $2 million to $8 million depending on size and revenue. A regional chain of 20 or 30 stores? Now you're talking hundreds of millions. When Albertsons and Kroger tried to merge in 2022, the deal was valued at nearly $25 billion. That's the ceiling. Somewhere between I bought one store and I bought Albertsons is where almost everyone actually lands, and most people who get into this business start much smaller than they imagine. A handful of stores in one city, one region, one demographic, and they grow from there over 10 or 20 years, not overnight. So let's say you've got your stores. Here's where the real cost of ownership kicks in. And this is the part nobody tells you about going in. A supermarket bleeds cash before it ever makes cash. Think about the timeline. You sign the lease or take out the mortgage on day one. Interest starts accruing immediately. You order your opening inventory, and in grocery, that inventory is enormous because customers expect full shelves, not half-empty aisles. A single supermarket might stock anywhere from 20,000 to 40,000 different products at any given time. That's not an exaggeration, that's just what a normal store looks like. You're paying suppliers, sometimes up front, sometimes on tight 30-day terms, long before you've sold enough to cover it. Then there's the build-out. Refrigeration units alone can cost $500,000 for a single store, and they need constant maintenance, because if your freezer section goes down for even 6 hours, you're throwing away tens of thousands of dollars in spoiled product in a single afternoon. Add licensing, insurance, and staffing you have to hire and train before you open the doors. Cashiers, stockers, butchers if you're doing a full-service meat counter. Bakers if you've got an in-house bakery, pharmacists if you're doing pharmacy. All of that is an expense sitting on your books for weeks or months before a single customer walks in. And here's the part that really catches new owners off guard. Even after you open, cash flow stays negative for a while. It takes time to build a loyal customer base. It takes time for word to spread that your store has good produce or fair prices or friendly staff. Meanwhile, your fixed costs, rent, loan payments, salaries, utilities, refrigeration running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, don't wait for customers to show up. Most new supermarket locations don't hit break even for 12 to 24 months. That's 2 years of paying out before the store is actually paying for itself. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong. And once you're open and stable, the dirty secret of supermarkets is that the core business, selling groceries, is one of the lowest margin businesses in the entire economy. Net margins for grocery chains typically sit between 1 and 3%. 1 to 3%. Compare that to software companies running 20 or 30% margins, or even restaurants running 10 to 15%, or car dealerships that can hit 5 to 8% on the right lineup. You're moving an enormous amount of product for an incredibly thin slice of profit on each item. Walmart, the biggest grocery retailer on earth, runs on margins that would make most CEOs in other industries laugh. But Walmart makes it work through one thing: absolutely staggering volume. When you're doing $600 billion a year in revenue, even a 2% margin is an enormous number in absolute terms. Tens of billions of dollars. But if you're a small or mid-sized chain without that volume, that same 2% margin might not even cover your debt payments, let alone leave anything for you to actually take home. So how does a supermarket chain actually make real money? It's almost never just from selling groceries at the register. There are two real income engines, and only one of them is obvious. The obvious one is retail sales, food, household goods, the stuff on the shelves. This is the regulated, heavily competitive, thin-margin business everybody sees when they walk through the door. It's necessary, it fills the store, it brings in foot traffic every single day, but on its own, it barely survives. Grocery is also heavily regulated. Food safety inspections, labor laws, pricing transparency requirements in some regions, and price controls in others during crisis periods. That regulatory weight adds cost and limits how creative you can get on the sales side. The less obvious one, the one that actually makes chains rich, is everything built on top of that foot traffic. Slotting fees are the biggest example. Brands pay supermarkets just to get premium shelf space, eye-level placement, end cap displays, the spot right by the checkout where impulse buys happen. These fees can run into the tens of thousands of dollars per product, per region, and they go straight to the chain's bottom line with almost no additional cost, because the shelf space already exists whether or not a brand pays for the good spot on it. Then there's private label, store brand products. Think Kirkland at Costco, or Great Value at Walmart or Trader Joe's, which is almost entirely private label. Typically carry margins that are 20 to 30% higher than the equivalent name brand product, because the chain cuts out the middleman brand markup entirely and controls the whole supply chain itself. Costco's Kirkland Signature line alone generates over $60 billion a year in sales, and it's often more profitable per unit than anything else on their shelves. Add in pharmacy operations, which run much fatter margins than groceries, gas stations attached to the parking lot, that bring people in for cheap fuel and then walk them past the whole store. And increasingly, retail media, literally selling digital ad space on your own app and self-checkout screens to the same brands, paying you slotting fees. Kroger's advertising arm, Kroger Precision Marketing, has become a business worth billions on its own, built entirely on data from customer loyalty cards, tracking what people actually buy and selling that insight back to the brands trying to reach them. It's a strange twist. The supermarket chain becomes an advertising and data company that happens to also sell groceries. And that side of the business often carries margins closer to 40 or 50% night and day compared to the 1 to 3% on the shelves. This is the real model. Groceries get people in the door and keep them coming back every single week, sometimes multiple times a week. Everything layered on top of that traffic, private label, ads, pharmacy, gas, financial services, even in-store banking kiosks in some chains, is where the actual profit lives. The store itself is almost a loss leader for the rest of the ecosystem built around it. Now let's talk about how badly this can go wrong, because the graveyard of failed supermarket chains is enormous, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because it's not small regional players, it's household names. Take A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. At its peak in the 1950s, A&P was the largest retailer in the United States, bigger relative to the economy than Walmart is today. It had over 15,000 stores at various points in its history. But it failed to modernize, failed to compete on price against newer discount grocers, and slowly bled market share for decades, clinging to an old operating model, while competitors built bigger, cheaper, more efficient stores around it. It filed for bankruptcy twice, first in 2010, and again in 2015 before finally liquidating completely and closing its remaining roughly 296 stores. A company that once defined American grocery shopping ended up worth nothing, and its brand simply vanished. Or look at British retailer Woolworths, not the American version, but the massive supermarket and general goods chain that had over 800 stores across the United Kingdom. It collapsed in 2008, wiping out around 27,000 jobs, partly because of debt load and partly because it never found a sustainable niche between discount grocers and full-service supermarkets. Being stuck in the middle, neither the cheapest nor the most convenient, is one of the most common ways grocery chains die. Customers either want the lowest price or they want the best experience. The businesses caught in between, offering neither clearly, tend to lose to both sides at once. Now look at the other side, a supermarket business done right. Costco is the case study everyone in retail studies obsessively. Costco runs on razor-thin margins on the actual products, sometimes barely breaking even on individual items, but makes the overwhelming majority of its operating profit from membership fees. In fiscal 2023, Costco pulled in over $4.6 billion just from membership fees alone, and that number is almost pure profit because the cost of maintaining a membership program is tiny compared to the revenue it generates. That one structural decision, charge people to shop here, then sell them products at near cost, turned Costco into one of the most profitable and beloved retailers in the world. With a stock price that has outperformed nearly every other retailer over the past 2 decades, and a customer renewal rate above 90% in most markets, which is almost unheard of in retail. Another success story worth mentioning is Aldi and Lidl, the German discount chains. Their entire model is built around ruthless efficiency, small store footprints, a limited product range of maybe 1,500 items instead of the 40,000 a typical supermarket carries, almost entirely private label, and minimal staffing. That efficiency lets them undercut competitors on price, while still running healthier margins than traditional full-service grocers. And it's why both chains have expanded aggressively into markets like the United States over the past decade, eating market share from legacy players who can't match their cost structure. So what separates the AMPs from the Costcos and Aldis? A few things, and they all come down to structural decisions made early, often years before anyone outside the company notices trouble. Scale matters enormously, but scale without discipline is a trap. A&P had scale and still died because its cost structure never adapted to a changing market. Location strategy matters just as much. A supermarket lives or dies on whether it's in a growing area with the right income demographics, because you cannot easily move a store once it's built, and a single bad site decision can lock you into a losing position for decades. Dependency risk matters too. Chains that lean too hard on a single supplier relationship, a single anchor location, or a single demographic can get wiped out when that one thing shifts. The way many downtown grocery chains got hurt by the shift to suburban and then online shopping. Labor relations matter more in this industry than almost any other retail category because grocery workers are heavily unionized in many regions, and a poorly negotiated contract or a prolonged strike can bleed a chain for months. And increasingly, the chains that win are the ones that figured out how to make money beyond the shelf through private label, membership, advertising, or delivery rather than chains still trying to survive purely on thin grocery margins the way businesses did in the 1980s. Which brings us to where this industry is actually heading. Online grocery and delivery have changed the math permanently. Instacart, Amazon Fresh, and grocery chains' own delivery apps have forced every player to either build expensive logistics networks or partner with someone who already has one. And both options eat into already thin margins because someone has to pay for the driver, the packing labor, and the technology, and it's rarely the customer alone. At the same time, the retail media trend, turning your stores and apps into advertising platforms, is quietly becoming one of the fastest growing profit centers in the entire industry. With major chains now generating billions in pure advertising revenue that barely existed a decade ago. Automation is creeping in too. Self-checkout lanes, automated inventory tracking, and in some markets, fully automated micro-fulfillment centers that pack online grocery orders without much human involvement at all. Cutting labor costs but requiring heavy upfront technology investment, the chains that will dominate over the next 20 years are the ones treating themselves less like grocery stores and more like data, logistics, and advertising platforms that happen to sell food. So here's the honest math. 2 ways it can go. The optimistic scenario, you build or buy a chain with real scale, say 50 to 100 stores. You develop a strong private label program that makes up 20 to 30% of sales. You layer in pharmacy, fuel, and advertising revenue. And you run lean on operations with modern inventory systems that cut waste and theft. In that world, you're looking at net margins climbing from that brutal 1 to 3% baseline up toward 4 or 5%, which on say $2 billion in annual revenue is $80 to $100 million a year in profit. That's a real durable cash-generating empire. And it's exactly what companies like Kroger and Publix have built over decades of patient, unglamorous execution. The realistic scenario, though, is that you're competing against Walmart, Costco, Kroger, and Amazon simultaneously, all of whom have more buying power, better logistics, and cheaper capital than you. You'll spend years fighting for 1 to 2% margins, praying nothing goes wrong with your supply chain, watching a single bad lease or a single competitor opening across the street knock 10 or 20% off your revenue overnight. You'll deal with food spoilage, theft, which in some markets runs 1 to 2% of total revenue on its own, labor shortages, and suppliers who have more leverage over you than you'd like to admit. Most regional chains that try to scale past their home market either get bought out at a modest premium, or they slowly shrink and quietly disappear the way hundreds of American grocery chains already have over the past 50 years. You're not buying a supermarket chain, You're buying a razor-thin margin logistics operation that only becomes a real business once you figure out how to sell something other than groceries.